We are back in the Cosi Talk studio. I have my buddy Ronnie Dickson from Prosthetic
Howdy.
and Associates of Tennessee on board, one of the best darn prosthetists here in this country, who is coming to give us a lot of information tonight on suspension systems. And we're going to give you guys a couple minutes to jump on board. Many of you have been sending me some very beautiful messages about the pictures and videos I've been posting from my trip to Guatemala. Which I took last week with the Range of Motion project, which was completely and totally amazing. And yes, I'm wearing one of the huipiles, so one of the traditional blouses that the women wear there. I'm very proud of it. So guys, in the next few weeks, you're going to see me sharing a lot of pictures and videos from that wonderful, wonderful trip. But tonight we're going to be talking about suspension systems. And this one is, I'm not going to lie, it's out of my wheelhouse. So that's why I dragged Ronnie on board to help me with this talk tonight. All right, I see you guys chat. Okay, here we go. We got Chuck on board. Don't be shy, guys. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and more importantly, what's in your mug this evening. Did you get anything interesting, Ronnie?
No, I'm actually dehydrated right now.
I was like, here's my Florida mug right here. We got Susan. Susan, that's a hilarious emoji. I love it. We got Tom on board. Thanks for coming on board, man. We got Brett listening in from the YouTube channel. Guys, as a reminder, I do broadcast from my YouTube channel, also named Cosi Talks. Pretty easy to find me there in case you have any trouble with Facebook. We got Sandra on board from Gainesville. She's got water because she's a Florida girl. That's right. Brett with his coffee. We got Pastor David on board. You got tea in your mug. Benny from Madeira Beach Kids Camp. Oh my goodness, you're not in Texas today. We've got Susan from Canada. Mark S. What's going on, man? And we've got Felicia. Oh, Felicia, I haven't seen you here in a while. Thanks for coming on board. All right, guys, we're going to give you another minute to jump on board. So it's funny, Ronnie, I was telling my kids, the usual death threats, be quiet, mommy's going live, all that kind of fun stuff. And they were asking me who's on the show tonight. And I said, this guy called Ronnie, and he's a world-class rock climber. And my son was like, ask him if he climbed in Austria. And I'm like, where?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, some of our competitions happen in Innsbruck, but I haven't been over there yet.
He was just completely random. As a 12-year-old, so you never know what's going to come out of their mouth. But he was just like, you need to ask him if he's climbed in Austria. And I said, okay.
He must know the Alps are over there.
He's like, they're known for their mountains, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, they kind of do have some really good mountains. All right, we got Patricia on board from Naples. We got Thomas, who's specifically asking us to discuss the difference between vacuum and suction. Trust me, Thomas.
Yeah, we're going to get into that for sure.
Everything. We got David Long from Georgia. We got Line Comadre. What's going on? All right, guys, we got a good crew on board. We're going to get started. For those of you joining me for the first time, welcome. My name is Cosi Belloso. I'm a physical therapist amputee specialist here in Tampa, Florida. And with me this evening is Ronnie Dickson from POA, Prosthetic Orthotic and Associates of Tennessee. So a lot of you know the famous POA clinics from Orlando and Tennessee. So we are so lucky to have him on board. So like I mentioned before, guys, we're talking about suspension systems. And this is something I realized in the 4 years I've been doing the show, I've never done a show just on suspension systems. So I'm really happy to have Ronnie on board this evening to help me out with this. Ronnie, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, excited to be here. It's I'm really excited to get questions from everybody. Because I think this is a topic that a lot of people, obviously everybody who's in these chats has experience with because they've worn some form of a socket design and a suspension system. And, we're going to try to weed through some of the differences of all the different options that are out there. And, just kind of preface that these are some of my experiences with these things, over the 12 years of my career, working with people both in and out of this country. But also too, just wanted to mention that everybody's going to have lots of different opinions and your opinions are valid. You've lived those experiences. So regardless of what I'm up here saying tonight, this is definitely a topic that has a lot of variety. So this certainly isn't the end all be all, anything that kind of gets said here. It's just a starting point.
Absolutely. And guys, like all of the talks that I do, there's so much to know about suspension systems, the same way there's so much to know about prosthetic feet and prosthetic knees. So we just try to put things into kind of general classifications just to make it easy to understand. And this is something, guys, of all the prosthetic componentry out there, suspension systems are something that I still struggle with myself as a clinician, how to classify, how to identify, all that kind of good stuff. But Ronnie did a really amazing job yesterday of helping me kind of put a form to this to hopefully make it easy to understand. And like you said, there's so much more involved, but we're going to try to give you that general overview and start answering those questions. Hey, Jody from Utah, and Beth Hudson. Oh, wonderful. Compadre, what's going on? I got comadre and compadre on board. Aloha to Joan. Good to see you, girl. All right, guys.
Yeah, Jody, I just took my dad to Bryce Canyon in April, and we had a blast. It was really, really awesome out there.
Nice. All right, guys. So we're going to get started. So let's talk a little bit about the purpose of the actual socket, right? So your socket, very simply, is this part. This is what we refer to as the socket, right? It's the part that goes onto your residual limb. And it's basically the interface between your residual limb and the rest of your prosthesis, right? The number one most important component of your entire prosthetic leg is your socket. And the reason why I say that is because a study was done, probably more than one study, and it showed that the number one reason an amputee will not use their prosthesis is because their socket is not fitting well. Not because of the componentry underneath it, not because they don't have the latest technology. It's because their socket is not comfortable, okay? And there's in my brain, there's two basic things to consider when you're looking at the socket. You're looking at the shape of the socket, and you're looking at the suspension, meaning how that socket is held on to that residual limb to prevent it from falling off. And it was funny in Guatemala, I promise you I'm not going to inundate you with Guatemala stories, but there was one guy who was getting his very first leg, and he was freaked out that his leg was just going to go flying out. And I basically had to tell him to fling out his leg. He had a pin lock and a system in there to show him that it was suspended on and it was not going to come off. Okay. So suspension, guys, hugely important part, right? So when you have very good suspension, you're more connected with your leg. You're going to have better proprioception. It's not going to feel as heavy. Okay. And this is something I hear a lot from my patients when they're first learning how to use their leg. It feels heavy, right? And they're going to feel more comfortable and more stable walking. Ronnie, your turn.
All right. Yeah. Sorry. I'm already just starting to write down some questions here.
Yeah, I got you. Don't worry.
But I want to get to Stephen's question here in a little bit. Stephen, that's a brilliant point. And I promise you here in about 15 or 20 minutes, we might be in the position to answer that.
Yes.
So yeah, let's just get right into it. So yeah, I think you did a great intro. You know, the socket is the interface between our residual limb and the prosthesis, and it's got to be comfortable. I definitely ran into a situation early into being an amputee where I was not comfortable with my prosthesis, and it was really tough to manage with, at that time being a young 19-year-old, trying to do different things and then getting home at the end of the day and just being in a lot of pain. Nobody wants to be in that position or be insecure with their prosthesis, not sure if it's going to stay on. So this is really important to work with a prosthetist who understands that this is the most important, vital part of getting you up and moving, and continues to work with you on finding a solution that's customized and unique to your needs.
Absolutely. And guys, yeah. if we for some reason miss your question tonight, be sure to copy and paste it, especially when we open up to general questions, because we do want to address as many questions as possible. So guys, I'm curious, start putting in the comments section, what kind of suspension systems do you guys have? All right. So while you guys are posting all those comments, we're going to get started on the below the knee. And we're talking a little bit more about the socket design. And I mentioned before, there's a socket shape design, and then there's the suspension. And sometimes that kind of intermingles one with the other. Sometimes, a lot of times, part of the way the socket is shaped is helping provide that suspension as well. And that's sometimes where it gets a little bit sticky when you think about it. All right. So for the below the knee, there's two big camps. There's the total surface bearing and the patellar tendon bearing. And yesterday I totally revealed my age because I told Ronnie, I'm like, man, I'm a patellar tendon bearing girl, because that's the only thing that was around when I started practicing. And with the patellar tendon bearing socket, it means that all of the weight was on the patellar tendon. And I just realized I do have a below the knee socket, but it's not a patellar tendon bearing one. Okay, so basically the patella, which is your kneecap, there's a big fat juicy tendon right underneath it. Okay, so with these patellar tendon bearing PTB sockets, okay, all of the weight of your body would go there versus the total surface bearing. And I'm going to let Ronnie explain that.
Yeah. So, and I think a little bit of context here is good. You know, the patellar tendon bearing socket is an older socket design. I mean, we're talking back from the, 60s and the 70s. And the reason why it was necessary was because we didn't have silicone liners to cushion the residual limb. So if you can think the, bottom tibia, the bottom bone doesn't want to hit the bottom of the socket. So, because it was sometimes hard to make those interfaces, which were mostly foams, comfortable, they had to find a way to suspend it proximally. Well, what happened then, leading into the 90s was the invention of the gel liner. And this kind of started to change a lot of different things, where now we have this interface that's between the residual limb and the socket, and really, really does a good job of providing comfort, padding, and cushion. So out of that, and out of the design, out of suspension sleeves and out of air valves came the idea of total surface bearing. Well, now we don't have to really crank in as much on certain areas of the residual limb to keep it comfortable, because now we have suction, so we can reduce pistoning or movement in the socket. And we can create these designs that are a little bit more gentle and not as harsh as the PTB, where we were bearing all of our weight in one place. There still is a little bit of a formula to total surface bearing, because everybody's limb has this unique topography. So some people can take more weight at the bottom than others. And it's very, very simple. Pressure equals force over area. So if I'm fitting a socket and someone's very sensitive at the bottom, I'm going to have to be more aggressive in other areas of that socket. Other times, if I'm fitting somebody and they're not sensitive and maybe they have a longer residual limb, my design can be a little bit more flowy, a little bit more easy. It doesn't have to compress the residual limb as much, because they can tolerate more weight over the whole surface. So the idea with the total surface bearing is that rather than focusing on the patellar tendon, we focus on splitting up the pieces of the pie to make that socket as comfortable as possible for that person.
And then as a result, as he mentioned, you're going to have more contact with the socket. There's going to be less concentrated pressure, hopefully on just one area. You're going to get better sensory feedback, which in turn is going to help you with my favorite topic, proprioception. Okay. And this is also in some cases helping with the circulation, depending on the design of the socket itself. So let me just read back. So guys, I'm going to read back here. If you guys, those of you who are on below the knee amputees, do you know if you have a total surface bearing or a TSB? Sometimes people refer to it as total contact, even though it's a different category, or a PTB, patellar tendon bearing. Those of you who know what it is that you have, go ahead and put it in the comments section, because I'm kind of curious to see who has what nowadays. All right. And we've got here, let's see. Susan says, I'm in an elevated vacuum suspension. We've got... All right. Marianne has a pin lock as a double above the knee amputee, and she's very happy with hers. Patricia is an above the knee with suction suspension. Mark has suction. Megan has pin lock. Chuck says he'll be getting an adjustable Sealant liner. All right. So we've got a lot of things all across the board here. Jody is a pin lock. Beth is suction. We got suction with an X5 liner. Thomas says PTB was torture. Susan says
they work interruptions for sure.
It is. And it was definitely getting used to have that. I remember that back in those early days. Are suspension and suction the same thing? Yes and no, Jody. Suction is a form of suspension. Does that make sense? So suspension is the manner in which the socket is held on. Mark says he's pretty sure he's a total. All right. So we got a lot of good answers here, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, I mean, basically, we talked about the total surface bearing, the patellar tendon bearing, and those are the main elements of how we're going to design our socket. Most of the stuff that's happening these days is some form of a total surface bearing. Then, we have other design elements that we throw in there, and we're strictly just talking about the design now. We're not talking about the suspension, which is how it's held on, just how it's going to fit and contour to the residual limb. So, some of those below the knee sockets might have flexible inners. They might have different cutouts, different windows to allow certain areas to flex out. And some things that have become more in vogue these days are the adjustable sockets and things of that nature to where, there might be a panel or multiple panels that can adjust in and tighten. So in a nutshell, when we're talking about design, that's most of what's happening on a BK. Now, when we get back down to the part about how it's suspended, we definitely have a longer laundry list of ways that happens.
And we're going to get to that. So guys, just to recap, right? Repetition is the mother of memory. For my below the knee amputees, you're looking at two basic socket shapes: total surface bearing, sometimes referred to as total contact, and your patellar tendon bearing. So moving on to my above the knee. Okay. So we've got two basic classifications, and I'm kind of rolling my eyes a little bit because this is where when you line up 10 clinicians, you're going to get 10 different responses as to what ischial containment, all that kind of stuff means. So you have ischial containment and sub-ischial in terms of the socket design itself. Okay. So in a couple of socket shows I've done in the past, you guys have heard me talk about the more antiquated quad socket. Okay. And that changed a lot in the 80s. Was it the 80s that we really started moving away from that? Mm-hmm. So it was a more elongated socket, and then we kind of mushed it. So it had a longer AP. So basically it allowed you to utilize your hip flexors and your hip extensor muscles better. Okay. So with the socket design, we have the ischial containment, ischial tuberosity, basically your butt bone, and then sub-ischial, meaning the trim lines are well below that. So Ronnie, this is where I want you to give your 2 cents on.
Yeah, let's kick it for sure. So as Cosi mentioned, the quad was something that was happening pre-1980s. And that was a socket that was tight from front to back. And then in the 80s, we came up with this design that is called ischial containment, otherwise known as a narrow ML. So the socket's actually tighter from inside to outside, from side to side. So the whole purpose of the ischial containment was with the suction or with the suspension systems that they had at the time, which was skin fit suction. So think of all the tissue, the thigh on someone's femur. They would pull that into a socket with a bag, compress that tissue. And because there was no liner and because there wasn't any other form of suspension other than suction, it had to be tight in a lot of different areas. So they had some specific design elements that made those sockets work. So one of those was the fact that the socket would form a bony lock up on the pelvis, on the ischium, otherwise known as the sit bone. And that would help control the stability of the femur a little bit, because if not, the femur would move around almost uncontrolled in the socket, and it would affect somebody's gait pattern, or possibly even just keep clapping into the side of the socket, and that would cause issues on the bottom with pain and discomfort.
All right, so I'm just going to show Bob here is going to demonstrate. I like the word sit bone. I always say butt bone, but I think sit bone's a little more elegant. So basically this bone right here, the bone that when you sit down hard and you sit down a little too hard and you feel it, that's your ischialtuberosity. Okay, so when you had the socket, as Ronnie was explaining, that had to be contained in there to prevent the femur from bell clapping around in the socket. So they would bring the trim lines up pretty high, especially in the back, or in the back as well.
And then, so kind of going from there, ischial containment was a really, really powerful thing in the 80s and the 90s. And there was lots of different ways that practitioners would put their stamps on it. So, you'd get things like Sabelich sockets and, all sorts of different variations, the Marlowe anatomical socket. So just different people putting their stamp on a standardized design that was otherwise still ischial containment. Then, same thing that happened with the below the knees. We get more materials in play. We get access to more technology via liners, and then via different suspension systems, or via more just different creative methods that came up just over time. And that kind of spawned the ability to do different things with socket design. So now we're not having to rely as much on ischial containment, which is still a foundational like principle behind almost every above the knee socket. But now some people are getting aggressive. We're doing sockets that are sub-ischial, which are completely below the ischium. And this is where above the knee prosthetics just gets kind of crazy. I mean, to tell you the truth, where there's tons of things that can be classified into other, where almost every practitioner probably has their own spin on, how they design their sockets, myself included. And that's why there's just too much going on to focus in the scope of one conversation. But, I just speaking for myself at this point, ischial containment is something that relies a lot on the skeletal anatomy for stability. Subischial, is a design that I'm finding, at least in my clinical practice, works like true subischial, like multiple inches away from the groin. We use it a lot on knee disarticulations because oftentimes those amputees have a 10-inch or longer femur and have the ability to distal and weight bear. So you don't have to worry about doing as much proximally. And they happen to be really good candidates for subischial. But then, most of the other stuff that I'm doing falls into the classification of other. So it really gets tailored on a patient by patient basis based on what the needs are for that person. If we have somebody who has a 4-inch femur, a very, very short femur, think of less than a third of their thigh, we're going to have to be more diligent in how we design that brim and how that brim interacts with, the person up, up towards the, all the private parts anyways. But, and then if we have someone who has a longer residual limb, we can be more aggressive in how we cut those trim lines. And then too, having access to different technologies, like one of the technologies I'll talk about later, our double wall socket that we do, I feel like it gives me liberty in my design to be more aggressive with my trim lines in terms of comfort, because I'm getting so much stability in my socket system. And also really, really good suspension too, and stabilization of the femur. So there's a lot, really too much for the scope of one conversation, without having a whole whiteboard and a full dissertation on the topic. But those are just different, a few different designs and kind of the reasons why on above the knees.
No, and definitely. And guys, we'll be showing you a picture of that double wall socket, which is pretty amazing. So we're going to take a break for just a quick moment and we're going to do a giveaway. All right. So those of you guys, it's your turn now. And actually, Jody, I'll get to your question in just a minute. So guys, go to the POA Tennessee website. I put the link up there and tell me the name of the 3 clinicians that are under the team tab. There's 3 good-looking guys that are pictured there, and I want you to tell me their names. And the winner, we're going to pick a winner from whoever. Y'all just put the answers in there. We're going to randomly pick someone to win a Cosi Talk Strong Body annual membership to all the videos, 150.
Oh, that's a good giveaway right there.
A pretty darn good giveaway. So Jody, going back to your question, the person who can tell you if you have a total surface bearing or a patellar tendon bearing is your prosthetist. The quick and dirty way to check is look inside your socket. With a patellar tendon bearing, there's like a little shelf in there that would fit just right underneath the kneecap. So it's a prominent kind of little bump that sticks into the socket. So that's kind of a way if you want to try to look at that and see. But yes, your prosthetist is the one who should be telling you which kind that they made for you. All right, so let's see.
I'll answer Stephen's question really quickly. The answer is yes. Whatever makes you feel comfortable. I'm a big advocate. A lot of times patients come in and find some of the coolest solutions that our practice chooses to utilize. There's nothing that's going to hurt it. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
No, and for me, I like the liquid to powder lotion. That's kind of like been my go-to favorite for the past 3 years now. That Vital Fit makes, because it doesn't get gummy, it doesn't get gross, and it really helps people with the friction there on those tough parts. All right, guys. So go ahead, go to the website I just posted. I'll post that website again. Tell me the name of the 3 team members that are on the team part of the website. All right. So we're going to see who's the winner tonight. All right. So now we're going to get to the real sticky part. All the different ways.
Yeah, this is what everybody came here for. They're like, why are you talking about sockets? We're here for suspension.
But y'all can see, right? If the socket design is well made, there's a lot of innate suspension that's going to be provided by the socket design itself. And then this is just me, my personal, professional, 20-year experience opinion is when the socket is well made, any additional suspension is just kind of icing on the cake, right? So I feel like if the more comfortable that person is in that socket design, just the better. Thomas is asking, how game-changing are custom liners and who makes them besides Autobach?
Yeah, Tom, Autobach makes custom liners. Oser just got out of the custom liner game, so they're no longer in. There's a couple other manufacturers that might come into play here in the future. Some private clinics, like mine, and some of the other prosthetic and orthotic associates branches do their own custom liners. Mm-hmm. And I've heard of other people doing really interesting things in their practices as well. But Autobach is the only major manufacturer right now that's doing custom liners. And for me, I think that when they're used with the proper cases, they do make a big difference, but they're not for everybody.
And then Thomas, if you want to learn all about liners, Ronnie and I actually did a show all about liners about a month ago. So you can go into my YouTube channel or the Facebook page and you can see in the archives our last show that we did all about liners. Let's see. Oh, okay. And again, if Stephen, if it started to slip a little with the sweat and use on the distal end, and again, sometimes I just tell my patients to just keep layering that liquid to powder on there. The other thing to make sure, Stephen, is make sure it's completely dry before you put your liner on. All right, we're starting to get some answers in from this giveaway, guys. Go ahead and keep posting your answers down. So, Ronnie, tell us about suction suspension.
Yeah. Okay. So there's definitely multiple different ways that you can achieve suction. So the whole idea when we say suction, what we mean is there's some sort of valve in the socket that's going to evacuate the air. And then the prosthesis is going to stay on the residual limb because of the, pressure that's created. Right. So the first one that we have on here on our list is suction with a sleeve. So on a below the knee, that's pretty self-explanatory. You'll have a sealing sleeve that goes over top of the knee, and that seals to the liner. On an above the knee, it is possible to seal with a sleeve. Our double wall system does seal with a sleeve, which is really, really nice. And that's another AK suspension system there. And then also too, sometimes I've seen it on above the knees, once again, only on knee disarticulations really, where you can cut the top trim lines down so much that you can actually have a sleeve at the top of an above the knee prosthesis. Those are really, really rare cases, once again, on a really, really long knee disartic. So now your next form of suction, this is both above and below the knee still, would be with a Sealant ring. So you think of a little gasket ring that goes around the liner. You press your residual limb into the socket, and that ring creates a seal around the surface of the socket. That is another way that you can achieve suction. Most often that's used in above the knees. I have seen it used in below the knees as well. As a below the knee, you definitely want to make sure that you maybe have a secondary form of suspension, because if you were to pivot really hard or cause that seal to pop, your leg would come off pretty quick. But I've seen it done successfully too. So, but that would be my only fear of a Sealant ring on a below the knee. There's just not a lot of surface area there.
And I was gonna say, I feel like I see like the Sealant ring, suction with Sealant ring for my above the knee, at least in this area, I feel like I see a lot of that. So guys, chime in. How many of you have that Sealant, the ring for your above the knee suspension? I don't think I've actually ever seen it on a BK.
Yeah, I've seen it on a BK. I mean, it works. It's not my favorite. It's not something that I would choose to do in my practice. I just did a veteran recently, really active guy, still in active combat. And he had the double. So Oser makes this liner that has a pin, and then it also has the ability to put the sealant ring on it. So for him, he felt like that worked for him, and I aim to please, so I wasn't going to argue with his experience that works for him. So we made it rock and roll.
I was like, that leg was just not going to come off ever.
No, definitely not.
Mark, that's a great question. We're going to be addressing that a little bit later on in terms of what are the deciding factors a prosthetist uses on deciding upon your suspension system. Let's see. So Susan says, I tried the Sealant Ring and my knee just felt unstable and then switched back. And David says, I have one, not very fond of it.
Yeah, it comes with its own set of challenges too. Yeah. The above the knee, what happens is sometimes those seals are located towards the distal end of the residual limb, so the bottom of the leg. And for me in my socket designs, that's a place that doesn't really like to get as much pressure on it. So, you're putting the most important part of your suspension down at the bottom, and then you're asking it to be really tight. So the reason why they do that is because they don't want air to purge down in and break the seal. So the further down in it is, the less likely it is that it's going to come off. For me, it's just not personally my favorite. Oser does now make a movable seal where you can choose where it goes. I find that I like about mid-thigh, and that's a nice place where we can really, really put some pressure on people and then leave the bottom of the residual limb alone. So there's some other options out there other than the bottom Sealant Ring. But yeah, I feel you, David. Yeah.
I know we struggle. I will say it's not, again, a knock against the Sealant Ring. It's just, this is what I've noticed is people struggle a little more with the Sealant Ring. And also, I don't know if anybody else runs into this problem. A lot of my amputees, when they start shrinking and we have to start putting socks on, we end up having to like jury rig and cut the sock on the bottom to cover the distal end of the limb and then create a garter above the Sealant Ring and try to figure
yeah, it doesn't leave you a lot of room for variability. And ultimately, most amputees that I work with do have a lot of volume fluctuation. The ones that become less active, which isn't ideal. Sometimes they'll, gain weight, but then you have a lot of amputees as that muscle atrophies, which is natural, or as they become more active with the prosthesis and their residual limb shrinks, then that leaves them in a really, really hairy spot where if we were using the Sealant Ring, that could get compromised for sure.
Yeah. So we've got the suction with a sleeve, we got suction with a Sealant Ring, and then we're going old school suction skin fit, which is only...
Yeah, we kind of described this a little bit when we were talking about ischial containment earlier, and it's where you have a bag or a sock that you would use, and the reason for that is that it's a way to kind of draw the skin into an otherwise socket that's too tight for that skin. You can't just stick your leg in it because the top of it is meant to be tight so it stays on. Through the valve down at the bottom, you kind of pull all your skin in, and then that skin tension on the surface of the socket is what keeps everything held together. It still gets done, and there definitely are situations where it's appropriate. Definitely it's the most intimate connection with the residual limb because it's skin and then socket. There's no liner interface in between. So you're going to have a lot of control, and Cosi's favorite word here, proprioception of that prosthesis. But it's really harsh on the skin if it's not done properly. It can cause a whole myriad of issues. Sometimes there's a lot of slipperiness when it comes to sweat and things like that. So there's always situations where these things are appropriate, and a good prosthetist knows when to apply them. Yeah, this is one that's gone a little bit out of vogue recently.
I know. I was gonna say the only people I ever hear of who wear a skin fit are usually the folks who were amputees back when skin fit was the big thing, and that it just happened to work for them. And we mentioned yesterday, Greg Menino, that he wears his skin fit, but he's also a prosthetist himself, and he's been an amputee for a really long time. So in terms of getting just the right fit. Hey, Barbara. Oh, there's my Barbara. She's watching me on YouTube this time. All right. So we've got the Skin Fit. Now let's talk about the vacuum. This is probably one. This is the one. And I warned Ronnie about this yesterday. This is the one that causes a ton of controversy because everybody has an opinion about vacuum. So everybody be nice tonight, okay? So tell us about...
This is going to get good. I'm going to preface it first with, if you're in vacuum and you love it, I'm like 100% on board with you. I'm not arguing with you. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But generally speaking, I don't think that most people, I don't think that they need vacuum. I think what we need more in this industry is sockets that are properly designed and that fit the patient well, and that suction, especially when done with the sleeve or in a really, really powerful form, does a really, really good job of keeping the stability of the residual limb. There are cases where vacuum is really, really good. So what I've found in my practice is residual limbs that are overly fleshy, what the vacuum does is it'll tighten everything up. So, suction might tighten it up a little bit, but the vacuum is going to tighten it up a lot. And it's really, really going to create a lot of control and stability. Then in other cases too, I've worked with a lot of people maybe have really bad skin grafting and burns from their accident or from the trauma. And what vacuum does is it locks them into the socket and it eliminates any little bit of micro movement and things like that. It is a little bit more finicky to work with sometimes. And sometimes too, when you have someone who has a lot of different volume fluctuations or who isn't in tune with maybe how to adjust the sock ply in their prosthesis, the vacuum can actually become problematic. So a lot of it is just finding the right thing for the right patient, which is kind of something that we've come back to time and time again in this conversation. So, more often than not, what I'm seeing is people are coming into my office, and I'll explain my point of view, with feet that have vacuum hoses attached to them, and the feet are supposed to pump the vacuum out. These hoses are already frayed, they have holes in them, and or they have the valve that's clogged. And these are situations where I think that vacuum is inappropriate because these people are not getting anything out of this product. A lot of times when you're talking about things like, I'm sure maybe Susan, I'd be curious to hear if you have an electronic pump or a pump that's attached to your foot. But I think that the electronic pumps more often than not do a much better job at achieving vacuum than a gimmicky widget on a foot, which just adds weight and adds extra hoses and tubes that create, just extra problems for the patient. So, I guess without really diving down into it too much further, vacuum's great for, when you have a really sensitive residual limb that can't afford to have any extra little micro movement, or when, you have a residual limb that has a little bit of extra tissue and it does a really good job firming everything up and making it feel secure. And there are people in this chat right now that might fall out of that experience that love their vacuum, and that's completely 100% okay. I'm glad you love it. And if you're having a great experience with it, you should keep doing it.
Absolutely. And I agree 100% with what you just said. In parentheses, Mariella Mason, you are the winner for the first giveaway. So congratulations. Send me a message after the show with your email, and we will go ahead and get you signed up for the Cosi Talk Strong Body annual subscription. And guys, I've mentioned this on the show before. When it comes to the elevated vacuum, I have like a respect kind of relationship with it. Like Ronnie said, if one of my patients comes in and they have vacuum, or one of you, my viewers many of you are saying, I have vacuum, I love it. Then I say, props to you if that is allowing you to live your life and not have to think about your leg and you feel comfortable. Wonderful, wonderful. But when I have someone who's new and asking me specifically for advice on socket design and suspension systems, and they say, "Ooh, I've heard about elevated vacuum," my first advice is generally to say, especially if this is your first socket, get the socket fit right? Keep going back to the prosthetist until you get a really comfortable socket. To me, and this is just Cosi's, opinion, the elevated vacuum should just be icing on the cake, and if you're a candidate, what Ronnie just mentioned, okay? Because what you don't want is if the socket's not fitting well and you're using the vacuum to kind of make up for the little discrepancies in that socket, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're not.
Yeah. On that same point, Cosi, yeah, the socket should fit good in and of its own, and then some of the extra things that get added to it, like vacuum, should be something that makes it better. It shouldn't be something that makes it work. The same thing goes for adjustable sockets. That socket should fit good, mostly normally a pin socket, which we're going to talk about next. And then when you add the adjustability to it, that should be the icing on the cake. That should make it better. But it shouldn't be the reason that the socket works.
Right. And it shouldn't be I like what you said, it shouldn't be necessarily to solve a problem. It should be to enhance the fit of the socket. Susan says her prosthetist will only give elevated vacuum to those that have been amputees for over 2 years. And I kind of like that policy. And I know I'm going to get raked over the coals for that, but I'm going to say it anyways. Your limb changes so much, right? Those first 2 years as an amputee, you're still trying to figure out how that socket is supposed to feel and everything else. And so to me, the more componentries you add on, this is the other part of it, the more variables are in that equation. So if something isn't working, that's one more variable that you got to figure out. Well, is the problem coming from the vacuum suction? Is it coming from the socket bit? So for me, I like things to keep it simple and then add on as needed. Okay. And I've actually talked to a couple of buddies of mine who are longtime amputees. And if anybody would be considered a good candidate for an elevated vacuum, it's this one individual that I'm thinking of. And he said, his words to me were, I have sockets that fit beautifully. He actually hasn't had to change his socket in 10 years. This is just how well made his sockets are. And he said, I don't want elevated vacuum just because it's more moving parts for me to have to think about. Okay. So again, guys, we're just saying this because I just want you to have food for thought. Okay. Take this as food for thought. Ask these questions to your prosthetist. And we're harping a little bit more on the elevated vacuum because this is what I get a lot of questions and comments about when it comes to suspension for this show. So I guess the question you need to ask yourself is, what problem or what do you think vacuum is going to do for you, right? And if it's because you think it'll make your socket fit better, then you should probably think about looking at the fit of the socket first, right? Yeah. So we beat that horse down pretty well, I think.
That was spot on. Yeah. So let's move on. And too, in this chat room, I love it. And this is, you get a lot of amputees that are really passionate about their pin sockets, and then you have the other camp that's like suction sleeves, let's get it pumped on there. So talking about our next suspension, which is a locking suspension, and we can talk about it with the pin. So this is oftentimes exactly what it sounds like, a liner that rolls on, and it has the ability to screw a pin down in the bottom of it, and then that pin will click or lock into the socket. That's one way that a locking socket can happen. The other way, and oftentimes, there's lots of people who wear pins out there. You can also create a locking socket with a lanyard. This is mostly done on above the knees, and there's different variations on the lanyard that I've heard people talking about in this chat. But the idea that you have some sort of strap or ratchet that clicks, or that you feed through the bottom of the socket and up through a buckle, that's really, really great for some cases where, maybe someone is having a caregiver help put on their leg for them, or they would have trouble lining a pin up. It definitely is a form of suspension that I would normally associate with someone who is, going to be lower activity, because they might be having someone help them put on the prosthesis. Not always. Really weird story, right? I was 19 or 20 years old and I ran my first 5K in a lanyard socket. In hindsight, it's complete insanity, but it's what I was offered at the time. Wow. It was the best thing that I had. So, that's a blast from the past. I forgot about that one.
Wow. A 5K in a lanyard. That is impressive.
Yeah. So it was sloppy and it was flopping around everywhere on me, but it got the job done. I wanted to do that and have that be an experience that I went through. So I just went for it. It wasn't optimal by any means.
No, and it's interesting. I saw that's basically the majority of what we saw in Guatemala. You know, granted, we were trying to make, or the prosthetists were trying to make 26 prosthetic devices in the span of 2 to 3 days, and to do it in a cost-effective way. And this was a very quick and easy way to show the person how to put that socket on. And it got the job done. So here's an interesting, so Susan, yes, you bring up a good point. You were not a big fan of the pin lock because of pistoning. So that is one of the drawbacks sometimes with using a pin lock system, is that you have the potential for pistoning, meaning your residual limb is moving up and down in the socket itself, and it can create skin problems on the bottom of the residual limb if you're not careful with that. Pin lock for me, again, it's one of those like, not my favorite suspension system. My favorite, I think, is just suction suspension right there. But I do see it's a wonderful beginner system, and there are some of my patients and viewers that they just, that's all they want. They're very happy with it and they continue with it. I see it a lot in my runners. So my runners, a lot of my runners for their walking leg, they won't necessarily use pin lock, but in their running leg, they'll choose to use the pin lock to really feel that leg suspended on there, and then with an additional sleeve on top. Felicia, I wanted to address this. Felicia said, I hate not knowing what it should feel like. And I want Ronnie to really voice in on this one, because you have personal experience as to how should your socket feel.
Yeah. If I were going to voice it in the simplest terms possible, right? It shouldn't be largely uncomfortable. So it's going to be touching you if you're in above the knee. Let's just pretend you're in above the knee. I mean, even if you're below the knee, it's touching you in places that weren't meant to have things, cradled over top of it, right? So let's just clear the air in the room right there. But what should it feel like? When it goes on, it should be mildly noticeable, right? I know I have my socket on. I can wiggle my leg around and I can feel it there, but it doesn't cause me any pain to do so. As an above the knee, I think certain things should be non-negotiables. You should be able to sit comfortably in it without having it jab up into your behind. It shouldn't, as a properly fitting socket shouldn't pop off at random intervals. It's hard to get there. And trust me, I can tell you that I've been there in the sense that it took me, the better part of 3 or 4 years of pretty dedicated looking to find a prosthetist who had really, really good solutions for what my case offered. My first socket left me in a lot of pain. And my second through fifth sockets one was marginally better than the other. But I guess a good fitting socket, you should only mildly notice it's there. It shouldn't jab you in any sort of really uncomfortable ways. It should stay on, and it shouldn't stop you from doing the things that you want to do with your life. There are other factors, other health factors that may pop in there that aren't just socket related. But if we're just talking about a prosthesis and we're just talking about a socket on an otherwise healthy individual, I can tell you from meeting lots of different prosthetists who are really, really good at what they do around the country that, these people exist that would, really, really love to help anybody who needed their help get fit in the way that I'm describing.
Yes, and yes, and yes. I actually had a viewer a couple months ago, and she gave a beautiful analogy. She said it's kind of like if you have a well-fitting socket, it's like that favorite pair of jeans. You're wearing jeans. It's not like you're walking around naked. You're wearing jeans, but those jeans move with you. They don't feel like they're too tight anywhere. They don't feel like they're riding up anywhere. They just move with you and allow you to go through your day. And it's chasing the fit of the socket, the comfort of the socket is kind of the holy grail for prosthetic devices. And it's something that I always encourage my patients and viewers who write to me to, just keep going for it. Keep going back to your prosthetist and working with them. And like Ronnie, for you said it took you 3 to 4 years.
I had to break up with a couple of people until I found the person who had the right set of tools to help me out. And it wasn't because I didn't like the other people that I was working with. I thought they were phenomenal human beings. They just helped me as much as they could.
Right. And then Stephen, Ronnie's an AK. And guys, if you want to hear this side of Ronnie's story, our very first show, did we do it in January or February?
Something like that. Yeah, it's been a really crazy year.
Guys, go back again. I'm plugging all of our old shows because they're really darn good. And he gives a lot of really great information in terms of not only, you know, his own personal story, but how he had to go through a couple of prosthetists to get the prosthetist who eventually taught him how to become a prosthetist to get that right fit. Okay, so go back and watch that show, guys. Let's see. We've got...
Yeah. And then the last thing here, this is like a weird one that even Cosi didn't even know existed. You can make a locking suspension now with a magnet. So instead of having a pin down at the bottom of the liner, a manufacturer, Autobach, does make a magnet in the bottom of their liners. I am still a little confused on this one, but I think if someone had like really, really big dexterity issues and things like that and couldn't push the button for the pin, there's all sorts of really crafty ways that you can unlock that magnet. Other thing about the magnet is that you don't have to line up or find the hole. The magnet will find the lock. So once again, I do think that this is a solution that's catered towards maybe a lower level of user, and nonetheless a solution that's going to be awesome for some people, because I'm not an ultimatum, kind of person. I think all of these are valid and have merit for the right person. Yeah. So anyways, more info to come on the magnet. That's new on my end.
No, and I was like, golly, because if I had a nickel for every time my patients either got stuck in their pin lock or we just couldn't get that pin into the little hole lock. How many times we were, no. Anyways. All right. So, here's a good one. BMAC. I like that name. BMAC. Watching me on YouTube is saying, hi, for the above the knee, what is the solution for sitting on the toilet with the prosthesis on? I've heard that it's uncomfortable and slippery on the seat. Any recommendations? And I hear
the pad on the back of the socket works pretty wonderfully. Normally we'll do some sort of hydrometer foam, so a little bit of a stiffer foam, and that keeps it from being like a carbon fiber or a plastic on the toilet seat, which is also plastic, or porcelain or whatever it is. That at least makes it two different materials, one that's just slightly kind of spongy, and it'll make that experience less horrible.
Okay. And then Susan says, sounds great. I got so many blisters from pistoning, going back to the pin lock, and with vacuum didn't get any. My limb is healthy, huge invagination and swelling. So the vacuum does work well. And also the skin that was left to use has a lot of scarring. So I believe the elevated vacuum suspension is best for me. And again, Susan, you're ticking off a lot of boxes for good candidate for elevated vacuum.
Yeah. Super stoked for Susan and that she's, that works really well for her.
Yeah. All right. So we've gone through a lot right now, dude.
Yeah, I mean, we've done pretty good. I mean, we haven't gotten too far in the weeds on most of this stuff.
No, we're doing pretty good. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us. Yeah, we tend to go off on tangents a lot. That's a lot of
gosh, yeah.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of the next one is anatomical. So there's an amputation called the Symes amputation. It's a form of a really long below the knee, essentially, where they keep the ankle intact and they keep the heel pad and they push the heel pad on the bottom of the ankle and to create a weight bearing surface. With the heel pad, oftentimes that limb is wider at the bottom than it is just right above that. You look at your ankle and you look at how wide it is, and then right above it, it's oftentimes narrower or skinnier. So anatomical just means a suspension where we literally can make one part of the socket tighter to hold the prosthesis on. So there is no sleeve, there is no pin. All it is a shape of the socket or a contour of the socket that's going to keep that prosthesis on.
Yep.
So yeah, we do those. I mean, that comes up every once in a while. It happens a little bit in pediatrics, and it definitely happens almost exclusively to the Symes population.
All right. So I think we've gone over like the main ones.
Yeah. I mean, other, is old things here. Crazy. So 2005, I got my first prosthesis. That's really not that long ago, but I had a leather belt that went around my waist. That's another form of ancillary suspension. There's also different cuffs and different straps. Definitely, all stuff from the past when there wasn't a better way to hold it on. We've moved past that. sometimes these things come into play in really extreme scenarios.
Can I show off the one? I got
do it.
So guys, in Guatemala, gentleman walks in. He's about 72, 73 years old. He made this prosthesis for himself 25 years ago. Okay, yeah, pause for effect on that one. 25 years ago, so for the past 25 years, he was using this prosthesis and he was running with it. There's actually a video where he tells me, look, I can run. Try to see if you can beat me. And you see the two of us try and take off running. And this is how it was suspended. This leather strap went over his knee and that's how it was held on. There is nothing else built in for suspension. And this man works 12 to 14 hours a day still in the field, in el campo, what we call el campo, and doing that. So just had to bring out the old school suspension system there with the leather strap.
Yeah.
Sorry. Last story about Guatemala, I feel. Sorry.
Yeah. Same. I mean, my mom is from South America, so I'm half Latin. My dad is from here in the States. And I've just seen a lot of really incredible stuff during my trips down there of people making the best with what they have. So in a similar token of just a feel-good story, my friend Hase lost his leg mountaineering, and then with a very, very third world prosthesis, continued to mountain guide and climb and do those things. I met him in 2012 at Climbing World Championships in Paris, and then I had the opportunity to fit his leg in Bogota, Colombia in 2017, which was kind of like a full circle moment for me to help a really, really good friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, we're in the States, right? We should go find a prosthetist that can get you fit with this, stuff, and with a socket that fits you really well. But also too, the will of the human spirit is something that never ceases to amaze me. I don't know that I could do the same in those conditions.
Yeah. So this is going to bring us actually now to the way you like to do your suspension systems. Do you want me to share the photo now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, guys, this picture, this is good suspension. That's all I'm going to tell you right now. Hopefully I can do this the right way. Oh, where did it go? There it is. All right. Is that coming up?
Okay, so right here, this is right in the middle of the photo. This is my friend Jeff Bowman. He was one of the Boston bombing survivors. I got the opportunity to work with him on various sets of his prosthetic legs. He's a double above the knee amputee. So on the left, that's the owner of POA Orlando, Stan Patterson. And on the right, that's Jeff's brother. And we wanted to test the power of the double wall suspension, which is a form of suction suspension. So we held Jeff upside down by both of his sockets, which were in the stubby configuration.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd be able to pick him up. And yeah, I mean, I think if a picture says 1,000 words, right? I mean, you can see that those sockets are not coming off. I mean, that is bomb-proof suspension right there for, anything you could come up with.
That is, yeah, he's not going anywhere. That is like the poster child for suspension right there. So like, holy smokes. Yeah. Yeah. Cause like Ronnie just texted me this picture. He's like, check this out. And I'm like, oh my word, what am I looking at? So tell us about the double wall suspension system that you use.
Yeah. And I wish I had more photos or maybe even like a YouTube video to link, but here's going to go my best description right here. It's you have your liner that goes over top of the residual limb, and then you'll have some form of a sock, whether it's a thin sock or a thick sock that acts as a wick for all the air to come out of the socket. So the inner cup, the inner socket, which is about 2/3 of the residual limb, goes over top of that initial sock. You kind of position it on the leg and then roll the sleeve up. Once you've got that sleeve up, normally taking steps on the prosthesis will pump the air out of it without the need for a vacuum pump or anything like that. And just the fact that you have a sleeve suspension on an above the knee amputee at that point causes an insane amount of suction that won't be broken by things like riding a bike or sitting in a chair, because we don't have to worry about that pesky sealing ring anymore. The sleeve is going to move with the patient's body as it changes shape in whatever position that they're in. So we don't have to worry about air purging in and breaking the suspension. That inner socket has a locking mechanism on it that then keys into the outer socket where all of, we get our trim lines and our stability and things like that. So it's been a really, really powerful tool for me in my practice and getting to learn that from Stan, who was one of the pioneers of the system, to use in a lot of wide variety of cases. It works really, really well for long residual limbs, and I really, really love it on short residual limbs. A mutual friend of Cosi and I, Zach Gowan, has a very, very short femur, and we can take even a short residual femur of 3 or 4 inches and achieve suction that is very, very powerful, and that person doesn't have to worry about sitting down, with their prosthesis and worrying if it's going to pop off. So it's been cool. It's something that we offer and that I feel really passionate about. That helps me get really good designs and outcomes for a lot of different cases. Is it applicable for everybody? No, absolutely not. Nothing is. But we use it on a lot of people and it works good. But, kind of to this same discussion, I fit people with, vacuum, even though maybe it's not my favorite thing in the world, or I don't think it's for everybody. I've done pin locks for people because they just don't love the idea of having a sleeve. It's just having a prosthetist who knows what the tools are in his toolbox and is willing to apply them in the way that's best for your situation. I think this kind of gets right into a question we had earlier. How does the prosthetist decide suspension? And the key thing is I listen. I just sit there and I listen to what the needs of that individual are. And then normally what I'll do is I'll present them with some options. I'll say, hey, look, well, these are a couple of different things that we could do for you. This is maybe what my recommendation would be, but you know what? You've worn pin for a really long time and you're mentioning that you like it a lot and you don't want to change. I don't see any, I'll look in the case and see if there's any history that would make me be against a decision like that. But it's a two-way street. We have a conversation about it. We talk about what the options are, and then ultimately we come to a decision together on what's best for that person. Sometimes I'm put in a position to choose for somebody who really truly doesn't know. A lot of times we're getting somebody who's coming in with trauma and they're going through a lot and they don't have the bandwidth to be there with me on that conversation. So then it is my decision to make the best possible thing that I can for that person. But a lot of times I really love where someone has come in and they have experience and they can tell me, these are the things that have worked good for me. These are the things that didn't work so well for me. What do you think? And I can say, well, look, what do you think of this? Or maybe it just doesn't sound like maybe this got fit super well. So would you be willing to try that again? But it comes down to a conversation with you and your prosthetist. And I'm trying to put out the best of what I have to offer, but I'm also trying to listen so we can see where our common ground is on making you something that you're going to love. So
there you go. And guys, I do have, it's a video that kind of shows the double wall, one of the gentlemen describing it, and he's holding it in his hand so you can kind of see it. So I just posted the link to that video right there. And that's kind of our segue into our next giveaway, guys. I'm going to give away another Cosi Talk Strong Body annual subscription. I want you to click on that video and tell me the name of the model. So the name of the young man who is describing his double wall socket. All right. So go ahead and check out the video real quick. You'll see it in the captions. Save to watch that video later and then put that answer in the comments section.
So Stephen asked a couple of questions, and this question's right in line with kind of similar to what he had asked at the beginning. Stephen, the only thing I could say is, sometimes stuff doesn't pan out. The double wall works a lot for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everybody. It sounds like you guys gave it a lot of really good attempts and then maybe decided that you should change course. This is something that does happen to me in my clinic where, we'll work on something and then we might have to pivot to plan B. It does seem too like you guys are trying some form of a seal-in on plan B. And, there's also maybe some problems that are coming up with it. It's hard to decide at this point whether it's the design or whether it's the suspension system that's, we're having issues with. There are cases that are truly difficult to work through. But the great news is that, at least initially, it sounds like you're at a place, POA in Orlando, that has a lot of different tools to address that. So it can be frustrating as the patient to go through that process. But as long as you feel like you're being heard on the other side and that they're making the proper measures to get you comfortable or making a very, very good attempt at those measures, I'd say just keep rocking with it. There is a version of this story where, maybe another practitioner has a different set of tools that can help. But what I would say, just knowing how kind-hearted those guys are down there in Orlando, is just keep rocking with what the plan is and keep trying some different things out, and you guys will get there. But sometimes as a prosthetist, you can get really deep in the weeds on fittings, where, I'm frustrated because what I'm doing isn't working. The patient's frustrated because they've been to my office 10 times. But as long as that person doesn't run out of, out of patience with me, I'm definitely one of those beat my head to the wall kind of people until we figure it out. It's not always linear. Sometimes you're bouncing back and forth, and then eventually you'll kind of pinball to a position where you start to learn some things that work. But it's complex. It's not always straightforward, and that's the truth.
And guys, that's probably the number one good sign of a good prosthetist, is someone who's willing to go back to the drawing board time and time and time again until they get that fit right. No two people are alike. I've never seen the same residual limb twice. I've never seen the same prosthesis twice. So to get that unique fit for yourself, sometimes people get lucky on that first try, but more often than not, it takes several tries, including several designs. So Stephen, I know which clinic you go to, and I know that they provide excellent care. And in terms of just keep going back and communicating until they get the right fit for what you need. Let's see. All right, guys. So we've got some people coming in with their answers. So guys, keep popping in those answers to see who gets the giveaway. Felicia says prosthetists are some of the most creative people on earth. And I like to joke around, guys, making a socket. There's science behind it. Obviously, folks like Ronnie did a whole lot of schooling to learn how to make a socket, but it's also an art form, honestly. I think there's just a certain sculptural component there that it is an art form to get that to fit just the right way. So Ronnie, you mentioned about how you like it when patients come to you and they tell you, so I've had this experience with this suspension, this experience with this, and it worked or it didn't work. What about that person who has not had a leg yet? What kind of information can they give you to help get that conversation going?
Yeah, the information is just like, I'd say it's definitely at a much more base level and there's nothing wrong with that, but we're only going to get so far with the first rodeo. So, what are the things that you're doing in your daily life? And what are some of the things that you want to get back to? That's a great starting place. That can help a lot with my foot prescription and things like that. A lot of times, and same, I'm just going to be completely truthful here. I don't know what I'm getting into until I fit that first socket. So on a lot of these new amputees, I will use my experience to shape that socket in a way that I think is going to work for their residual limb. More often than not, because of experience these days, I'm going to be right more than I'm wrong. But even times like last week or the week before, I'm like, wow, that modification that I thought would feel really good for that person ended up not being so hot. So we go back, sometimes I can adjust it out, whatever it was that I did. Other times I may just say, hey, that was my bad. Like, let's take a recast at this. I know what I'm not going to do next time, and let's do it again. I do all my own fab in my facility and everything like that. So we can have those oopsie daisies and recover from them pretty quickly. Whereas in another facility that might be like, okay, I'll see you back in 2 weeks and we'll like tackle it again or something. But anyways, it's almost just as I think it's easier to work with someone that has experience than it is to work with someone who's brand new, for sure. So with brand new, I'm just using my experience to try and do the best that I can for that person, and then pivoting as we find out more information.
Well said. Brent says arts and crafts. I would take it arts and crafts, Brent. That's hilarious. All right, guys. So we have literally covered everything on our to-do list for this evening. This was no small undertaking. So Ronnie, thank you so, so much for all of the information, all of your expertise, and all your patience with putting the show together.
No, this was a blast. I mean, these are complex things that there's a lot of like misinformation about and everything like that. And, I hope I was able to clear up, just clear up some questions on these things. And if nothing else, just be really, really honest about it.
Yeah. And guys, I'm going to go back through to make sure we got everybody's questions. But if I did miss your question, don't be shy about elbowing me in the ribs. Send me an email. I'm very easy to reach, Cosi at cositalks.com. I'm still catching up from emails my trip to Guatemala because I didn't have a whole lot of reception there. So I thank you for your patience. But again, if you have any questions about suspension systems or anything related to prosthesis or recovery from limb loss, you can always reach me at Cosi at cositalks.com. What's the name of the video with Ronnie? So Felicia, if you go to my YouTube channel, and let me just put that down there for you. Okay, that's my YouTube channel. That's probably the easiest way to find my videos that are archived. Go under the video section and you'll see all of the live Wednesday night videos. So whenever you see Ronnie's face pop up, you're going to want to watch that video. There's at least, this is our third one that we've done this year. So Felicia, we did a show all about liners, and that was about a month and a half ago. And then in January, February, we did a show on prosthetists and how to find the right prosthetist. All right. So highly encourage you to go back and watch that. It's kind of go ahead and binge watch some Cosi Talks there. And we're adding new content there all the time. Already a subscriber.
Yeah, that's as good as Netflix right there.
That's right, man. Go binge watch Cosi Talks. All right, guys. As always, guys, Ronnie, thank you. Thank you for
my pleasure as always.
Thank you for
I'm available. You can find me around. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to just be a resource. I was really lucky to have a lot of really amazing people that helped me in my journey. And I'm happy to answer any questions for anybody at any time.
All right, guys. And I also want to thank not only Ronnie, but his clinic, Prosthetic Orthotic and Associates of Tennessee, because they are one of my sponsors for this year on the show. And guys, I've said it on numerous occasions. I'm able to produce the show and everything associated with it because of the generosity of my sponsors. So thank you very much again. And guys, I will be back. Same bat time, same bat channel next week. As always, thank you for letting us be a part of your lives this evening, and we will see you next week. God bless, guys.
Yeah.